for UFO back then was Dan Geeb's UFO Folklore, and it's still the top match today on Google 8 years later. And you probably have seen it yourself. He's got some fine research links, no doubt, and I've been to the site as a resource tool a lot. But the first thing you get on his page are these quotes from Ezekiel chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 6, basically implying that what you're reading about in the Bible there is UFO encounters. And again, this is the #1 match on Google for UFO, and it has been for some time. So whether you're spiritually inclined or not, the first thing that anybody typing UFO into search engines is exposed to is the idea that UFOs are just a huge part of the whole Bible. And Dan's not alone in believing that or teaching it. It's a widely prevailing view. Most every miracle you read about in the Bible is a UFO encounter. And there's some pretty persuasive arguments out there, and even television shows, authors, researchers saying that. Found that it is a compelling theory, and ultimately, though, it's just not scriptural, because what we've seen last year, other times, is that real biblical evaluation of ideas like that, you might even go as far as to call it hack theology. Now, it is possible to take many random quotes out of the Bible and say, well, here, look, see, this could be a UFO, and I'd agree it is. But if you leave that quote in the Bible and present it in context of the whole chapter, that idea it really loses steam fast. And you know how I backed that up on last year's talk. I gave that whole presentation, so I'm not going to go ahead and do it all. I'll just say for now that I believe that idea of UFOs in the Bible is, it's not that I disagree with it, but their theology is way off. They don't have to name names, but they're grossly misinterpreting what the Bible actually says to make these arguments. And without making that whole argument today, I'm just letting you know where I stand on that idea. But the bottom line, in 1997, I knew I had to do something, or I felt it for sure I did, that God was calling me into this fray. And from that point on, I basically just threw myself into the work. I literally quit my day job at the oil brokerage firm, cut my working hours in half by going back to waiting tables, and I wrote the book that I've been putting off for years. And I got to know my geek friends a little bit better and had them all teach me everything I needed to know about how to make a website, because I felt my mission field at that time was the internet. And I can look back now and say that book it's really elementary compared to what we're all reading and doing today. And it was a good freshman effort, but I wrote in detail then online and then eventually hard copy about what I thought about UFOs being a demonic deception and how their appearing was going to be the ultimate catalyst for pushing people into accepting a one-world government under an antichrist. Now, including my personal stories, finally, it gave me the and just a certain edge that people are more willing to hear from someone they're not just theorizing, but I'm also an experiencer. People didn't like what I had to say sometimes, or they disagreed with it, but nobody would refute that of all people, I certainly had the right to an opinion. And I just put it on the internet, and back then, 97, 98, if you had a really kind of cool site, you could very easily get a link from the Art Bell webpage. And I did, and my traffic went from about 20 hits a day to 600 hits a day, literally overnight from that one link. Tremendous response, but very mixed. I did see the desired results, you might say, because I would get occasional emails from people who said seeing all this written out really changed their minds about the UFO phenomena, or that they were going back to church, or that they prayed the prayer that was listed on the website, things like that. Of course, I also got a lot of flack from different people, sometimes from people already in the church who were kind of slamming me for bringing the silly topic of UFOs into their religious beliefs. And then, of course, I'd get email from UFO enthusiasts who would slam me for bringing my religious junk into the serious field of ufology. So a lot of you have been there, I know. But for about 2 years in Nashville, I literally spent hours every day responding to the email I got from all sides. And I often learned a lot from the links and the information. People would just mail it straight to me. But mainly I also learned that I've got a long way to go from being an expert in this field. But I definitely also knew that I'd gotten more than a few things right as well, and that I definitely struck a few nerves. So sharing with you, I don't know, the Guy Malone saga, if that's not what you came for, but just in giving you an overview of biblical ufology to date, just in whatever, humility, fairness, honesty, or whatever, Guy Malone has been a pretty somewhat major figure in shaping this tiny, tiny, tiny niche market. It's not fame and fortune. It doesn't impress the chicks or anybody that's out in the real world when you're an expert on UFOs in the Bible. But I suggested UFOs in the Bible to a lot like Yahoo and DMOZ, Open Directory, just to get my site more traffic. But it's not that my book was all that. I did want to make that point because before me, guys like Bill Alner and IDE Thomas, they'd already published really good books on the subject. And not to mention Stan Deyo, he's speaking later today. And eventually Chuck Missler and Mark Eastman kind of condensed a lot of other people's research into a book, and they called it their own. And these were all important books. But in 1997, I'd never seen any of them myself. And they're good sellers, they've borne fruit, but my question was, quite frankly, how many people who are really into UFOs care what Christian authors have to say on the subject? And especially, we're going to plop down money to find out what they had to say about it. So aside from putting my book on the internet for free and getting tons of traffic early in the internet age, another thing what I did differently that was so significant was in 1999, I moved here to Roswell, New Mexico, if you're watching on DVD. But I had no idea what to do when I was going to get here, just that God was calling me to be where anyone in the world who's interested in this topic was looking. My main plan was to get the book placed in all the tourism hotspots, maybe head back to Nashville pretty soon. But as it turned out, the UFO Museum, the #1 tourist attraction here, you've all been there today or yesterday, I'm sure, they refused to carry the book there because it dealt with religion. That's what they told me. It was just their policy. Then I went to the big Christian bookstore here in town on Main Street, and they refused to carry the book also. Finish the sentence for me. Because it dealt with UFOs. You know, I mean, I live between Rock and Hard Place Avenue. You know, and a lot of you I know have experienced that same stuff. Rest of the story, commonly known, after I got here, I real quickly hooked up with two other important people in this field. That's Pastor Chris Ward and MUFON investigator Joe Jordan, who blew the shofar. Both these guys, they were taking their findings to the internet as well. And you remember when I said the first thing you see on UFO folklore is the reference to Genesis 6 was Chris's site was the only website on the internet then that I found anyway that was taking the topic seriously from a true biblical perspective, connecting it to UFOs, but saying that this was a spiritual phenomenon rather than an extraterrestrial one. And Joe is the MUFON researcher who found and published the testimonies of people who were stopping their abductions through the authority of Jesus Christ's name, which also convinced him that this was a spiritual phenomenon. But frankly, whether it's either of their sites or mine, if you're an outsider visiting, you really had no way of knowing if any of the information on these sites was all that credible. You might have thought you were on another Heaven's Gate website. There was just no way to tell. And so what I did in 1999 was I took off 3 of our websites, 3 people coming from very different backgrounds, all arriving at basically the same conclusions, and I put them under that single .org, alienresistance.org specifically. And doing that gave all these views of ours, I think, a pretty big credibility boost. Soon after that, we opened the physical location here in Roswell, and basically just took the kind of stand and got the kind of attention that attracts a little bit more than attention from the press. When you've got that logo going here in the heart of Roswell, New Mexico, it gets in newspapers and when press travels through Roswell. But that site, I'd say, with all the new links, we'd keep adding other researchers, the articles that we'd keep adding to it, it became its own little juggernaut in a way of speaking. Because today, even without a link from Art Bell, it gets over 1,000 unique visitors per day. And I even have a link on the site that you can look at the stats, and it proves that. I'm not just saying that. So all I'm saying on that, it's not me, but it is a defining work in biblical ufology as a tiny, tiny niche. And aside from just the website, though, you can get a doctrinal statement on almost any topic that there is under the sun from most churches or someone who wants to talk to you at length about any topic you ask them about, but that's not so for UFOs. You're lucky if you get a blank stare instead of a rude one if you ask most Christian organizations how they feel about UFOs and life on other planets. And if you're, I'm going to say it, if you're unfortunate enough to actually tell a pastor that you've been abducted and that you want some answers from him on